Hi, welcome to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Thanks for joining the conversation. Hoon Lee returns to discuss his experience making the jump from actor to writer on Season 3 of the hit HBOMAX show Warrior. He shares his take on the Writers Guild of America strike and thoughts on AI in the creative space. I could listen to Hoon speak all day long. He philosophizes without even trying. His views on the exercise of acting, writing, singing, and dancing are fascinating. We also touch upon the state of AAPI representation in film. Hoon also shares his writing thought process for Warrior Season 3. Fans, there are no spoilers, and I promise I will actually have Hoon back on to give me more details on the upcoming season. Hoon was kind enough to celebrate my legislative victory since he happened to be the first person I spoke to after hearing the good news. My AAPI history bill for required instruction in K-12 schools in Florida just passed the legislature and during AAPI Heritage Month. So we do a little bit of a role reversal and he took the interviewer seat for the first part of this episode. For those that don't already know, Hoon Lee is known for his portrayal of Job on the critically acclaimed TV show Banshee. He also voiced Master Splinter on Nickelodeon's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and plays Wang Chao on HBO Max's Warrior. I feel so fortunate to have these fascinating conversations with guests like Hoon. My favor, as usual, is to please continue to share this podcast with others. It would mean so much if you would also rate it and leave me some feedback. If you would like to help keep this podcast going and support the work I do by becoming a patron of the show, visit my website or patreon.com/SifuMimiChan to make a donation. For comments or suggestions, reach out on social media at SifuMimiChan. Now, on with the show. Hello, Hoon. Thank you so much for joining me on my podcast again.
Thanks for having me back. Appreciate it.
Oh my gosh. Well, we've actually been playing, I don't know, podcast tag. Is that what it's called?
Yeah. Our calendar tag, I guess, or how to maintain contact without actually ever really engaging. That seems to be what happens in your 40s for me, at least. It's just wandering around, never quite realizing that you can't meet up with anybody. That's
right. The wandering monk, right?
Yeah, exactly.
No, but you know what it is? It's that there's kind of an ongoing joke with why I have this podcast. It's so that I can actually talk to people I like to talk to. It's very selfish, really.
I think that's a genius idea. I should do that. I should try that.
Yeah. Well, and then it ends up being like everyone becomes a co-host of the show because I just keep having the same people that I want to talk to again back on. And I'm like, oh, it's time to talk to Hoon again. And so here we are.
That works for you. That works for me. It's all good.
Excellent. Well, I'm always grateful that you, make time in your schedule for me. I know you've been traveling and filming and doing all sorts of things. A lot of things I want to talk to you about.
Sure.
But I know you were asking me like, I've been busy, and it's like
you've been really busy. I've been watching from afar via social media, and your education legislation had just went through. Congratulations!
Thank you so much. You're actually like the first human I've spoken to, so I'm still really excited to talk about it.
Yeah, please do, please. I really want to hear about it.
I know by the time this airs, it would have been maybe a couple weeks, but literally this happened last night. So. Of course, I talked to my team until like midnight on Zoom, and I haven't slept in like 2 or 3 days. So I'm not sure, podcast listeners, disclaimer, what is going to come out of my mouth.
Right. This is going to be an all-timer, this one. This one's going to be one for the books.
Exactly. One for the books. So it's very exciting. It's an interesting time in Florida. I'm not going to pull punches now since my legislation passed, and I'll make sure I release this after the governor officially signs the bill.
Right.
But yeah, it's been a fucking shit show here in Florida. I'm not going to lie. It's been pretty crazy. And so the irony is that when I tell people, oh yeah, I'm working on education in Florida, people have actually laughed at me.
Now, as your co-host, can you walk us through what the specifics of the legislation are? What were the things that you're actually advocating for in this?
Oh, I love this. This is horrible. I'm going to have you back on. I feel like you're interviewing me now. Oh, that was such a switch. Right. So this started 2 years ago, and it feels like it's been 5. I actually had legislators tell me, well, I've been working with you on this bill for 3 or 4 years. And I'm like, it's been 2, but yeah, it feels that long. So after the Atlanta spa shooting, I got pretty irate like the rest of us.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very much restless until I put my energy into action. And upon researching education was like one of the biggest things that is always brought up as the solution to long-term solution for, anti-Asian hate crimes or any violence, any hate. Right. And I just thought about it and said, wow, I learned zero about Asian American history in school. I was Florida educated. I went here, grew up public school and private school educated, also went to college here. And I was like, wow, I know nothing. And so upon that, I know nothing, I went to kind of seek out what's next. I started a petition. I got a bill sponsor randomly. That just kind of happened. I learned the first year what legislation was like and how difficult politics are. And when they say, oh, it's all politics, I get what that really means now. And then this year, I learned from my mistakes. I went with a very specific strategy to get this done. And I can't believe it, but it's kind of done. So yeah,
that's amazing.
That's a really short version of the last 2 years of my life, which has been all consuming. It's like a full-time
So let me
job.
ask, as someone from the outside,
Yeah.
how did you even go about, it seems like there's an incredible amount of inertia that I think all of us really experience. And it's very easy to settle into this trap of feeling like, I can't do anything. I'm one person.
Yeah.
This machine is too large. I don't even understand this machine. I don't even know if it is a machine, right? And so how did you go about just getting, that first toehold that allowed you to push forward?
Yeah, I think there was what we call luck and timing involved, but I'm such a martial artist and the whole hard work equals results type of mentality. And that's just literally been beaten and ingrained into me, right? From a traditional standpoint. But so like I said, I went into action, and because through my Kung Fu, organization with Walam, we do a lot of community outreach. We started the Lunar New Year celebrations here in Orlando in 1980, right? Like, so we've been doing this for over 40 plus years. And so through that, I've met legislators. They go to the parades and everything.
Right.
And so I kind of reached out to, and through this podcast, I actually had some of them on the show to reach out to, hear what the issues are. And so I ended up reaching out to local legislators and saying, like, what do I do? How does this get done? And she literally, and this is Representative Escamani here in Orlando, was like, I want to write this bill with you. And I said, oh, okay. And I didn't even realize that in itself was like a huge jump, right? I didn't understand that getting a bill written is not a very common thing, because here in Florida anyway, legislators only have a certain number they're allowed to write. So the reps only allowed 7. So they've already probably promised a lot of things from the year before, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of how that got started. It ended up being not successful in that round for a plethora of reasons. But one of which is we are in a supermajority here, which is a Republican state. And so I needed to get a Republican on board and also work with the Republicans to let them see why this was important. So I literally had to hit the pavement. I had to go to Tallahassee several times during the session. I had to have very uncomfortable conversations with people that maybe I don't align with on other issues and learn how to compartmentalize. Big challenge in meditation for me there, but it was, so it was such a process. And when people ask, how can it be done? If they want to get it done in their states, my answer will be, go to Make Us Visible. You can learn all about advocacy there. And, I got connected with a really great team, a small but mighty team that really helped with guidance because they were getting this passed in other states. But Florida was we're a special state. I'm sure, I don't know other states that are on the news as much as we are, right?
I mean, we joke about it.
Looking in, but
that's the thing. I think it's it's pretty accepted now to use sort of Florida as a bit of a punchline,
right?
But I also think it's a little, it really feels like it's also a little bit of a crucible, and we're starting to understand. It's a way, I think, for people to maybe use a not so fair shorthand, I will say, to examine larger issues in the country. It's a sort of, I don't know, like a gestural lens that we just kind of use. But so you went through this whole process, and you said the first year it was a little bit of a swing and a miss. And then in the second year, what were the ways you adjusted your strategy in order to?
Oh, wow. You really are conducting this interview. I'm going to give you 5 more minutes. But
no, I'm really personally curious, and I think it's hugely important.
Yes, thank you for that. No, I mean, if I could have anyone interviewing me, I mean, Hoon Lee, wow, this is actually really great because and you just caught me at timing. Like literally, this happened last night, so I'm still like on the high. I haven't slept, so I'm like, whatever you want to talk about, let's do it.
Good.
Yeah. So, in all honesty, we did get a lot done in year one of building. So we made relationships, we talked to people, but there was a lot of resistance. One was having a Democratic sponsor was already a resistance issue. And then the second was, we're focusing on these things, right? And so we also ran out of time. It was towards the end of the COVID bit where the house was closed. You couldn't even go to Tallahassee yet. And then when it opened, it was kind of like we were already behind. It was too late to hit the pavement, as they say here in the biz, which means you basically go and run up and down the Capitol trying to talk to as many people in an elevator, on the stairwell, as they're coming out of their meetings. Like it's literally like talk and go. Wow. It's kind of what you see on TV. Yeah. Where it's like, okay, let me catch this person. It's like you're a little bit of a stalker, to be honest. Right. And you go down and you try to get the key players and you have to learn all of that. Right. So last year we did well with community outreach, meaning we had this across the state of Florida. All of the different orgs kind of were aware of who we were. We had a lot of constituents calling the representatives for the first time. I think AAPI engagement in civics like this is pretty low, generally speaking. And they all really rallied behind this because, as you and I know, Asian Americans are not a monolith. We're also not all from the same background. We don't have the same political views. We don't have the same religious views. It's very wide. But this was something we really didn't have very many people go, this is a horrible idea. Why do we want to learn about Asian American history? Like everybody was really behind this. And so I thought, wow, there's something we can all work on together despite other beliefs. This is like it's some sort of utopia like moment in my time that I kind of needed. Right? Through all this negativity and being somewhere in Florida where everything around you just feels like it's crashing down. I really needed that. And so the swing and the miss was there, but we still got through one committee, which again is like, oh my gosh, you even got it on agenda for a committee. That's huge. So we still did pretty good. And I think it's just because it's like anything else in your business, in martial arts and everything, it's about relationships, right? It's about sitting down and having honest conversations with people. And even though the legislators can be portrayed a certain way, and a lot of them are, but they're still just people. You know, they have regular jobs they actually go back to. They're like realtors or doctors, and they're not these like, up here on this pedestal. I think you just have conversations and share why this is meaningful and what this means for the community. I think, because the AAPI vote here, it's there, but we're not like the majority, right? So it had to be something that they did also had to buy into at least a bit, right? And so this year, I regrouped and I basically hit the ground running and I said, okay, I'm going to go after getting the right sponsor, not just a Republican, but someone who I thought would believe in the bill, would help push for it, because you could get a sponsor that also just like doesn't talk to anyone about it or anything like that. And just to give you a quick statistic, I think here in Florida this year, this session, less than 3% of bills that are written pass. It's a very low number. And apparently that's still high. Like that's every year. That's not just because it's this year. So it's a really difficult thing. And we met people that they've been like doing this for 12 years straight and still haven't gotten their bill passed. So we're very fortunate.
But their bill's crazy. Their bill is insane. That's the problem.
So
they're like free cotton candy every Friday.
And so, it's just such a process, and it just takes a lot of persistence and conversations, really, at the end of the day, and someone who is crazy enough to do the work and take time out of their life and just like just shoulder it, right? And had a really great volunteer team as well, different people rotating in and out over the last couple of years, but it's been inspiring. We had children, we had a 6th grader come to the Capitol to testify on behalf of the bill, which is really exciting. We had high schoolers and middle schoolers engaged, and so it's been really crazy. But like I said, you've caught me on a real high.
You should feel good because this is phenomenal, and also just listening to all of it, I'm exhausted. So I can't imagine how tired you must be.
Thank you.
But I was talking about your process to a friend of mine here because she is encountering a situation where she is sort of wrestling with a certain process in the educational system for her son here, who was a special needs child.
Yeah.
And, I think that it's really important to have examples of people that have sort of said, look, I feel strongly about something and I need to make a change about it, and to understand that can actually happen. That it may not be easy, but that the participation in our democracy is something that is literally at our doorstep should we choose to engage with it. And I think that's an incredibly important thing to hear. And I mean, I really hats off. I think it's an incredible achievement. Well done.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I agree, because I think it becomes an overwhelming entity that's like, oh, I wouldn't be able to do that. And I will tell everyone, I know nothing about legislation. I mean, I do now, but I knew nothing, like zero. I didn't even know how a bill became a law. By the way, Schoolhouse Rock, lies. There are no rules. Okay. The rule is there are no rules. A bill dies, it's not dead, because our bill was in a lot of trouble, and I had to go to Tallahassee to save it. Like literally had to go there to save it. It's like this, almost like a physical thing, right? And so, so it's really empowering, I think, to know as constituents and to be reminded that they work for us and that they need to listen to us, and that if we are willing to raise our voices, then we can get this done, right? And so just like an everyday human like myself, I didn't have a huge, corporate lobbying firm with millions of dollars backing me to go, a lawyer to go talk to everybody. I had some really great helpers that were on the ground, but literally like anyone can do it if they're willing to do the work, Now,
my understanding, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm just saying that holds true for almost anything. If you're willing to do the work, you can get it done, right?
Now, my understanding is based on your posts that it passed pretty clearly. Like there wasn't a huge amount of opposition. Is that correct?
Yeah. So we passed unanimously through every single committee we were in. We also passed unanimously through the House and the Senate when it was like our bill. And then what happened was, because of time, the Senate, we got held up. So we had to get amended onto another bill. This was how we saved the bill. So the language is still there. And it doesn't matter to me what bill number it is. We got really lucky there, where we not only got amended to like the education package of the year, which meant like already vetted by Department of Education and the governor. And so there's not going to be opposition. It's also, to me, one of the bills where I also didn't feel like, wow, we're being attached to something that I'm really depressed about. Like I feel in opposition with. Like one of the things one of the legislators said during the session was, perfect can also be the enemy of good. So it's like, obviously there's no perfect thing, but we got real lucky with the bill that we got attached to, where it was very technical. It was very much about education. And it was a bipartisan supported effort, which is pretty awesome. So yeah.
I hear that phrase a lot with regards to politics. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. And I often want to go, are you sure we achieved good?
Yes.
You know what I mean? It's like, I don't think 100%. Anyone's gunning for perfect.
Right.
So let's settle down with that little saying. It's like, look, I don't think anyone's under any illusions about perfect. We're looking for good. And this thing you're proposing is bad.
Yes. No, 100%. There's a lot of bad. I mean, and a lot of bad coming out of Florida. I had to sit through some very, very painful committee hearings. Yeah. We have the Don't Say Gay 2.0. We have the transgender bathroom bans. We have the 6-week abortion ban. I had to sit through some really painful things personally to me and compartmentalize and go, I'm here for this one mission at this particular point in time, because it's kind of do you take everything on and then get nothing done because you're being pulled? Or do you just do like chip away and do one focused thing at a time? And again, back to martial arts, for me, that's like one thing at a time. All right. I think I've given you enough time to be on the.
Thank you. Thanks for indulging me on that. I've been dying to talk to you about it. So I really appreciate it.
My listeners are like, shut up. Talk to Hoon Lee about Warrior and the Writers Guild and acting and way more interesting.
Way more. Like, this is way more important. Way more interesting. Way more important. Way more interesting.
We're not here to talk about legislation. Well, we were talking and kind of chuckling a little off air, because I was like, well, you advocate, you definitely speak out when things are wrong. And so, I mean,
no, there are levels. There are levels.
Well, we were both talking about Perry, our dear friend Perry Young, and I don't know if you remember or recall, but like I happened to be in New York. We met up for tea, and then we met an activist that he knew, and then I kind of like he knew my dad from Boston, and then we ended up at a rally the next day together. Like, of course,
as
naturally.
you do.
I mean,
that's always the thing that happens if you meet up with Perry in New York, you might end up at a rally. Just be warned, anybody.
Yeah,
who
so that tracks, which means he's at them very often.
He is, yeah. And he's such a great representative.
Amazing.
He feels so passionately about it.
Amazing.
And it is a danger with these sorts of things where, we can turn anything into a competition. And I think it's really important for people to simply do the thing that they can do. The thing you feel equipped to do 100%. That thing. It might be something you consider to be small, but it's certainly better than nothing. And it's the sort of thing that in aggregate can make a significant difference. One thing I'll get off this topic at your request. I could talk about it all day, but one thing I do want to point out as a sort of something that I think is really interesting about what you're talking about. As much as you talk about compartmentalizing what you have to deal with in order to deal with, potential allies that you might need, I think it's really important to also recognize that those people that might hold these beliefs that we don't agree with or are pushing forth policies that we see as absolutely draconian, they also have the ability to get a win somewhere else, that they see some value in something, that they aren't going to obstruct something that is in alignment with something that we need. I think that that's actually really important to recognize, because we're never going to be eye to eye on everything. Yeah. We just have to try to make the things work, Yeah. And so I find that very, very hopeful that you could, come to the table with people that are ostensibly, opposition, and recognize that in those people there are fragments of them or aspects of them that are in fact allied or can be allied, and that's something I think we lose sight of that so easily day to day.
No, 100%. And I'm actually really glad you shared what you just did regarding like advocacy or volunteerism or however you want to state it, just having those bite-sized actions that whatever is, reasonable for you. Like, it doesn't mean you have to take on this big thing. Like, I'm a little extra, right? But yeah, just making one phone call, like those things do add up and they make a difference. But you're right, because what we see on the news, those humans we see aren't the humans that I actually saw in the hallways that all work and like laugh together, have lunch together amicably. I'm like, I thought they would be enemies, that like they all sit on each other. The opposite.
Actors know when acting is happening. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Actors 100%. Can recognize actors.
Yes. Yeah. So I think that was refreshing. Yeah, I think it was, like you said, hopeful and refreshing to know, like, no, you know what, they are human, and there was some genuine and sincere conversations with people that I disagree on almost everything else with, and that is a hopeful thing. And so, if I've learned anything, that I think being able to hold those conversations, I think, has been healthy. But I'm definitely ready to step away from it. Take a moment.
No, well, congratulations again.
Thank you so much. I'm very grateful that you and I are able to share this conversation this morning. I'm like, oh man, I don't know what I'm going to be like at 10 o'clock after this crazy evening I just had and all this news and excitement. But I have been wanting to talk to you about so many things. Obviously, the Warrior trailer dropped. Everybody's super psyched about that. And not only, I don't know if it's big secrets, but we talked about it last time that, you're writing and also acting and doing so many different aspects of that now. What was that like for you to have kind of a different experience this time around? And
every season tends to have its own character. So in a season one of a show, you're often just trying to figure out what the hell's going on, and you're getting used to the flow of the production. Everyone is trying to solve that equation all at the same time in real time. And so in the worst incarnations of that, it can feel very chaotic, right? But in the best incarnations of it, it's absolutely thrilling. And it's a sort of thing that creates a lot of camaraderie and a sort of glue amongst the crew, which fortunately for us is what happened. Mm-hmm. And then second season, you're like, okay, I kind of understand what's going on. And you can start to shift your attention somewhat and start to evolve certain things. You've learned stuff from season one. You've, seen your own work for better or for worse. And you've been like, I'm going to change everything about how I do everything. Or you're like, okay, I need to make little tweaks or whatever it might be. And then I think season 3 for shows is often where, a lot of shows really hit their stride because they are, the process, you have the experience, but you're still discovering things. It's still fresh. You haven't fallen into a lot of bad habits yet still. And then I think the challenge from that point going forward is to not get too comfortable and to not become too settled in the things that you think are successful, and to remember that taking risk is part of what keeps something fresh and exciting and vibrant, So we had this sort of, I do think of it as a disadvantage and an advantage. The disadvantage was we had this massive, interval of time caused not just by the, worldwide crises that everyone was going through, but also by these much more mundane sort of machinations created by these mergers and, Cinemax and HBO becoming part of Time Warner. And then there was another merger when we came out, and those things just create a lot of uncertainty internally. And so you end up in a place where you're just kind of floating in limbo. We didn't know what the status of the show would be, et cetera. So by the time we came back, it had been 3 years. And, you can think about, you think about how different a person is in the course of 3 years, let alone in the wake of the pandemic, et cetera, all this political upheaval. And so when we came back to Cape Town, we were not only dealing with the baggage we were bringing either from the US or the UK or Canada, et cetera, but we were also dealing with how Cape Town was dealing with the aftermath of that as well. And they had a very aggressive lockdown, when we heard about it, we were like, that's intense, And so things were opening up, but they were still figuring things out as well. All of which is to say, things were very different in season 3. And we had to, it had somewhat of a similar vibe as a season 1, where you have to relearn processes. You have to sort of understand your mechanisms again. And I think that there's a benefit to that as well. Like, because of that interval of time, I think it would have been challenging for us to come back in full stride anyway. So to have more of the system sort of feel different and something we had to really engage with and pay attention to, I think it really helped bring our A game up. Like, we really had to dig in and sort of like find our way through this.
Yeah.
And I think that that's really going to pay off. That made it a hard season, but it was buoyed up by this incredible drive and desire, I think, for the cast and crew to come back with, not only not having missed a step, but to elevate it despite the obstacles to that process, to try to keep doing that. So for me personally, it was compounded by the sort of additional aspect of being a writer on the show and not knowing what that process was going to feel like and not understanding how that would play out or manifest itself in the course of the season. Mm-hmm. But I was really, I could not have asked for a better sort of result or process through it. Jonathan Tropper, who was our co-creator and our showrunner for season 1 and 2, he handed the reins off to Evan Endicott and Josh Stoddard, who have been with us since the beginning, and they're amazing guys. They have, just vast wells of intellectual and emotional resources to draw from. They have the trust of the cast and crew. So it was a wonderful team to transition to. Yeah. And Jonathan's presence was still felt, Brad Kane's presence was still felt. They helped, in obviously in the creation of the season and the breaking of all the story. Right. Jonathan was still very much at the helm at that point. And I think that for me coming in, it was as hospitable an environment as I really could have hoped for. Yeah. The part I was concerned about was I wasn't sure how I would feel watching scenes that I had written performed by these actors, I knew I would be excited because I was excited in the writing of it.
Right.
I do feel like as an actor, as part of the cast, I mean, you get to know the cast in a different way than producers do or writers do. And so I felt like I might have a somewhat unique insight into what they were capable of and sort of the things that I think they could do well. And oftentimes, if someone's very good in their job, any job, I think, that aspect of their personality or their skill set gets emphasized, and then the other parts are somewhat, just disregarded a bit, And I think any actor that's worth their salt, they're capable of a huge array of things.
Right.
And weirdly, I think often the better you are in some direction, the more they want to, that's typecasting really. The more they want to just sort of keep that very, very tightly focused. So in the ways that I was able to, these aren't dramatic seismic ways by any stretch, but in the ways that I was able to, my hope was to be able to allow my friends and colleagues to pull a little bit, stretch a little bit outside of the things that they just do naturally so well. And my secret fear was that I had seen these scenes so clearly in my head, and my fear was that I would get to set on the day and then they would perform it and I would feel terrible about it and be like, no, that's completely wrong. And like get really,
it's not my vision,
get really controlling and weird about it. And then and then ruin all my friendships and,
thanks.
But
Moon.
Yeah, exactly. Like I was like,
you're like, Langley, I wrote you something
this could
real
be bad
good in this scene.
Yeah.
Because I can imagine that would be fun. I mean, it would have been kind of fun if you gave him like a fake page. I mean, like, I wrote you this special soliloquy at the beginning.
Apparently, I think, what is it? I think it was the cast of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Okay. I think for one April Fool's Day, they gave Danny DeVito a fake script, like a fully written fake script in which his character is just like beaten relentlessly through the whole, like, it's a hilarious prank. But
you didn't do it. Missed opportunity.
No. Oh my gosh, there was no time. There was no time for any tomfoolery.
No,
we had a lot to do.
There's always time.
But when I actually ended up on set on the day and ended up shooting, I was so relieved and pleased that everyone did it exactly the way I want. No, I'm just kidding. Everyone did it completely differently from how I had seen it. But that is what felt correct. Okay. Like when I saw the performance unfolding, I was like, oh, that's actually right. And the thing I was doing, it really is a blueprint, and they made it something that was better than what I felt was on the page. It was such an exhilarating feeling. And I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about it. And so I was hugely encouraged by that. And it gave me a level of sort of joy in the process that feels different.
And relief.
Relief somewhat, but really the relief came, there was definitely some relief, but that was from the performance aspect. Like I trust my cast. It wasn't ever
right.
It was more about my reaction. Like would my reaction be this terrible, ogre-like reaction? But
I don't see that.
It really was the opposite. It really felt incredible to witness it, and it felt like a privilege. And the other fear that I really harbored was that the writing team, Jonathan, cast and crew would just be like, "Hey, man, nice try." Really
like
good
pat
effort.
You on the shoulder.
Yeah, because everyone's very kind.
Yes.
They're not afraid to speak to you, frankly, if it's required. But they're kind. They're kind people, and so no one was going to come to me and be like deliberately trying to tear me down for no legitimate reason. But you would be able to tell if people were, if they thought it wasn't so good and they were just trying to spare your feelings.
But
but everybody, the writers and Jonathan and everything. So to have to feel that I was supported, to feel that people were pleased with what came out, and to feel that the actors who I already knew were going to do everything in their power to support me in terms of their preparation and their commitment, which was absolutely the case. To feel that they felt the material was good, that was the biggest relief. That was the thing that where I was like, okay, cool.
Nice.
Yeah.
You guys all have such an interesting like family dynamic, and having had the privilege of speaking with a lot of different creatives and actors, writers, et cetera, on different shows and just the different experiences. And they're not all like this one. And you know, when you say you're writing for your friends and you're writing for people that you know well, and you're saying, oh, well, they did it different than I had in my head. But I think, like you said, you really know them so well that blueprint was there, and like the interpretation may be slightly different, but I think you knowing them probably made it even more, you know, incredible, and like the depth of it and everything. So, because you guys really have a very unique dynamic, I think, the Warrior family.
I think that where it really came into play, because what's surprising is not surprising, I guess, but one thing that can happen is that even if someone knows you very well and that you know they have your best interest at heart, sometimes you're surprised by, you know, the way they view you, right? And that way, it may not be an unflattering way, but it may be a somewhat limiting way, right?
Yeah.
And I think that what the real advantage for me was there's a lot of trust. So I think that if people encountered things in the script that I wrote that they had questions about, or that, you know, made them tilt their head, or that bumped for them, or whatever it might be, they were willing to give me the benefit of the doubt so that we could have a conversation and start to address what that thing is. And, you know, that might not have been the case if it was a writer they had no familiarity with, or a director they didn't really know. It might be more of a sense of like, I'm not sure where this person is going, and I want to make sure the integrity of what I've built is maintained, which I think is totally legitimate and fair. But I didn't feel that at all. I felt that people were sort of like, they were game. You know, they were going to just try, and they were going to give me the benefit of the doubt at every turn. That was a tremendous blessing. And I don't know that I'm not sure I would have pursued this path in another show.
Okay.
Just because I think that not only because I was so excited to write for this specific show, but because the environment was pretty much as hospitable as it was going to get. So now that I've sort of broken the seal on it, I feel like the world is opened up in that way. But, you know, I owe a lot to this production and the people involved, because I don't know that I would have felt comfortable crossing that threshold otherwise.
Nice. Yeah. And it's funny because you always hear about the writer's room and what, you know, and is it like what we all imagine, where you're all sitting around and brainstorming, and then you go back and write and you bring pages in? Or
I mean, I have the one experience. I could not speak to anything else. One thing I will say is a very sharp group of people. There were some things I was really pleased about, to be able to come out of the room and relay to the cast, which was sort of like, you know, I don't know that this happened a lot or happens a lot in our show, but it's not an atypical thing where a cast can grow a little bit paranoid about the motivations of producers and writers. And you start going, oh, this is the thing that they're trying to do, or, you know, this is the agenda they're trying to push, and I don't know that I fully agree with it, or what have you. And we have very little of that in general. And I would argue that a lot of whatever does exist on that level is easily chalked up to fatigue, just flat out fatigue. Which I think can be very deep seated for certain members of the cast because of their physical exertion on the show and the demands placed on them. And even then, it's incredibly mild when I've heard it, and few and far between. But I was very pleased to be able to kind of come back to the cast and say, everyone is as they appear to be. That there isn't this sort of secret dialogue going on that is like
conspiracy,
incredibly nefarious, and you know, and that people are just talking shit about people behind closed doors. And that also people's involvement, their investment, and the sense of importance of the show is genuine, and that they feel it in their bones. Because the reality is, as an Asian American performer, and with a cast that is largely of Asian descent, we feel it a certain way. And it would be really tragic if leadership also did not feel invested, or if they didn't recognize that we felt so invested, or they assumed that their investment was or equivalent to ours, you know what I mean? But there was an awareness of all of those things. And, I love that. And that they love the actors, that they were excited that to craft plot that would, challenge the actor or challenge the character or lead to a great hero moment or lead to a great tragic moment, whatever. I don't think that those things are uncommon amongst writers, don't get me wrong, but it's one thing to assume those things and it's another thing to see it firsthand.
Yeah.
And then to kind of come back to the community of actors and be like, I've been over the hill and it's like I've seen it.
Yeah,
I've seen it firsthand.
It exists.
And that's really great. Like that was a huge, like that made me feel incredibly good about a production I already felt really good about.
So much fun. I mean, obviously when the trailer dropped, everybody's super excited because it was long awaited. And the last time you and I spoke, I'm trying to, because I've been very fortunate. You and I've spoke off air a couple of times. You were kind enough to like give me advice, things like that, and just like take my phone calls. But you and I spoke, and it was just a lot's changed for Asians and Asian Americans in cinema and TV and film. And so Warrior was just like kind of almost like in that breakthrough moment still. Like we were still fighting for this show that had a mostly, Asian descent cast. And now we've got a film that just won the Oscar. Much of the cast just won the Oscars. And, Netflix has been throwing out a bunch of shows with AAPI leads and Asian leads. And I mean, it's kind of crazy because we're always like, oh, there's still much more work to be done. There's still a long way to go. But at the same time, it feels like just since the last time you and I spoke, like things are very different in terms of the landscape for actors who are of Asian descent. Would you agree?
I think that's always dependent on the time scale, right? Because, I'm certainly old enough to remember moments that felt like this in the past.
Okay.
So there was, Joy Luck Club, Miss Saigon, All American Girl, all of these things where people were like, now is the time.
And Jason, when we talked about Better Luck Tomorrow, that was
Jason. Yes, exactly. That's exactly.
Yeah.
That was a big one.
Oh my gosh, that was a big one. That was a big one. And we thought this is the turn, and then nothing.
Yeah, and that even like in smaller ways, even things like Lost and having Daniel Day Kim's character, this Korean, national, etc. And I remember receiving, hearing about that, and of course, being of Asian descent, it's something you pay more attention to. It probably sticks out more to you. So maybe that was a different kind of conversation. Maybe not quite the highly visible, highly public sort of thing that Everything Everywhere All at Once is. But there's enough there for me to kind of go, let's see where we are in 5 years.
Okay.
And let's see how it progresses, because some of it you could also, chalk up to the idea that there's a lot of content in general, right? That there's maybe more access, more variety, more streaming networks, and that what we're seeing is a result of the increasing number of niches that are being addressed, right? So what do we mean by success in this field becomes a more dominant question and a different question than it was before, because before it would have meant there are 3 television networks and there's X number of shows in prime time. They are 22 episodes a year, so if you're not involved in them, is your visibility at a certain level? If you're not a main character in them, is your visibility at a certain level? Right. So
So it's scale. A lot is to scale.
The scale matters.
Yeah, 100%.
And I think that it's why it's important to us. I think is that let's pick a metric, right? Let's say what we want to see is proportional growth of people of Asian descent in lead roles. That represents roughly the population of the country. And I'm speaking about Asian Americans, which is distinct from people from Asia, which is a different conversation.
Yeah, different conversation.
Yeah. So I don't know what those numbers are, but I doubt they're at parity, mm-hmm. And, once you start looking at what are we actually using to sort of identify what we mean by growth? Mm-hmm. Then I think we have a more valid conversation. It doesn't mean none of these things are important. They're hugely important. They're largely important because I've been thinking about this a lot. I've mentioned it in a couple places, but the familiarity effect, where once you see something happen because you've seen it happen, this is one aspect of it. There are a couple versions of it, but aspects to it, I mean. But once you've seen something happen, now you know it's possible. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Right. And then, so sometimes you see that where it's like in athletics, for example, where it's like someone breaks a time on a race and then suddenly a bunch of people can do it. There's something about mm-hmm. human nature where we have to understand that it's possible before it becomes possible. And so the significance of things breaking through certain barriers or acquiring a certain level of recognition, that feeds into that idea of, this is all possible. This is all the way it can be. The thing that was most significant to me about Beef, for example, was that this was an Asian American story. Mm-hmm. Almost the entire cast is Asian American. Yeah. Yeah. And quite specific in certain levels too, right? There's a lot of Korean Americans, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that was great. But what resonated the most for me is that no one really talked about it. It's not really it doesn't really matter in the world. It's not something that is a feature. And that's one of those things that really makes the lens shift. Now, there is obviously, there are characters who are white, who see the world. And when we're with those characters, you're aware of the shifting of the lens much more explicitly. But when you're just living with the other characters in the cast, it doesn't matter. And we're not talking about it. And so we're just looking at a story of people in specific situations with specific problems, with specific desires, et cetera, just like every piece of storytelling actually is, right? And that the fact of their ethnic background does not take center stage, mm-hmm. And that's the biggest fight I've encountered coming up as an Asian American actor in the era that I came up in, is that everyone wants that to be the most important thing they look at. And when it's that dominant in the frame, it eclipses everything else. Mm-hmm. And it's so vague as to be meaningless. The idea that, right, it's the idea that I'm Korean American, that's not a trait. That's not like a character description.
Right.
It's just an aspect. It's immutable. Mm-hmm. And does it help me inform certain kinds of stories? Probably, but just in the way that as an actor, I can draw off of a history. Mm-hmm. But, I'm not brought in, or for a long time, at least, I wasn't brought in to be like, hey, there's a guy that plays these kinds of characters well. Mm-hmm. The first thing they're asking is, what's his ethnic background? Is that in the breakdown? And what is his, maybe his age?
Yes.
Something like that, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, wow, that's not taking into account all these other aspects of a person's humanity, right? Mm-hmm. And isn't that what we're supposed to be talking about? Isn't that what a character is supposed to be built around? So I reserve my enthusiasm is there, but I do have I do have a memory of
Of course.
The echoes of these things.
Yeah, when you've been in the industry and been working and stuck with it, because as someone who didn't stick with it because I was like, oh, I'm not wanted here. I'm wanted elsewhere and can do things elsewhere. I feel like my energy would be better, like, well, you're not in LA though, right? You're not living in LA. Like now you don't have
not right
to.
now.
Now you don't have to. At the time you were there, you didn't have any, chance, kind of thing. And so that
you
that
actually
didn't take to me.
Well, you actually touch upon something important in that comment, which is much in the way that, an ethnic identity can sort of subsume all other aspects of an identity as an actor. The profession of acting can subsume all these other aspects of your life. And when people go, oh, you have to live in LA, you have to live in New York, what they really mean is certain things will be easier in those cities, potentially exponentially easier. And if you're at a place in your career where there's already a lot of friction because there's far too much supply to the demand, whatever it might be, then that's one way you can ease that friction, is giving yourself the advantage of proximity. Mm-hmm. But if that makes the rest of your life a problem, I think you have to ask whether it's worth it.
Yeah.
I don't know that many people, if I'm honest, where I feel like, oh, if they weren't acting, there was nothing else for them.
Yeah.
It would be as absurd as anyone pointing to any profession and saying that's the only thing that person can do.
Right.
Right. I don't think that is a healthy attitude.
Mm-hmm.
And there's even something more insidious about acting where people love it. They love it. It's a passion. And it's very difficult to exercise that passion outside of the profession. I think that's super dangerous because every other passion most people have, you can do that and no one looks at you funny. But for some reason, if you decide, oh, I'm going to act, but only, as a hobby, people go, I don't even know how you do that. Part of that is because of the construct. Like it really, in many ways, acting requires an audience. It requires collaboration. It requires these things. It's a highly integrated sort of activity, but it's not like you can't do it. You could get a group of friends together and read plays. It doesn't have to go beyond that. And you would be exercising all of these things. But we see that as weird. And we see that as almost frivolous, or we see it as the only part that makes sense to most people is if you're trying to become a professional actor.
Right.
And so that profession of acting suddenly dominates the landscape of your life. And you're moving to cities because of it, and you're changing all of your nutrition because of it, and you're changing the way you look because of it, the way you dress because of it, the way you engage on social media because of it. You're trying to change everything who you are to chase an imaginary idea of what you think some completely anonymous group of people might want. Right? And it's like, that's a tough way to live.
Yeah.
That's a really tough way to live. And you can rob yourself of many years doing that, So I think it's important for people to see acting as a part of their life, but not their life,
Wow. Yeah. That's really
I think especially as young actors, I think fall into that trap a lot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and there's a romance to it.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say something resonated with me last time that we spoke, because there was some banter on Twitter about one thing, and you're like, people think of my profession and they think it's one thing when it's not, right? Like there's such a misconception of what it is you do or who you are, and that and you articulate things so eloquently. So I'm very glad, at least for this last part of the interview, that I got to just sit and listen to you explain things so wonderfully, because I'm like, oh man, now I'm going to be thinking about that thing Hoon Lee said again for like weeks and weeks and weeks, which is why Langley said, Hoon Lee for president. You just you string together the thoughts so well.
He's from South Africa. He doesn't know what he's talking about.
Oh my gosh. I really enjoyed, sharing on all these conversations, and then just stringing it together where you all know each other. And then, It's been so much fun and such a privilege. But just before we wrap up, back to the writer aspect, because, you kind of, like you said, kind of got this foray into it now. And are you going to be continuing that journey?
Yeah.
Is that something that you're going to be looking to do in other avenues where it's like it's, for yourself or for other productions? And
now you do a lot of conversation with, is it Greg Rucka? Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So the comic book world, book world, right?
But he's also writing like The Old Guard, and
that's right. That's right.
He does screenplays too now. So
I think that I would be shocked if you found someone who's seen as like a comic book writer who didn't at least begin as an artist, or vice versa, right? Like those disciplines are married, and people who love the form, they aren't separated until you get to the professional stage, right? And there are plenty of examples of people who never separate them, right? Particularly in the indie world, I would say you get more writer, artist,
you do it all,
cartoonist, right, or comic artist,
yeah.
But I think actors and writers should see themselves in the same way. That what we're doing is telling a story, and we're doing it through the medium of dramatic performance. But I think there are plenty of actors out there that could write. I think there are plenty of writers out there that should act, actually, because the level of intellectual rigor that they can bring to it would potentially lead to a really interesting performance. There are barriers to cross to do that. And I do think that one aspect of that is that writing is it tends to be a fairly internal process, and it tends to be, in some aspects of it, have to be quite solitary. But if you're a television writer, for example, you're in constant collaboration with other writers. So I think that's a somewhat self-selecting group. That's a group of people that I think works with other people, not just at the writing stage, but in the production stage, especially if they're writer-producers. I would say to anyone who is like looking at exploring these things, it's like that line, use that line if it's helpful to you, if it helps you organize your tasks. But if you feel this pull one way or the other, you should go for it, because I think they are the same thing. They are related things. They are so tightly coupled. And part of the reason why I've been interested in writing in general is because I feel like it's a creative endeavor that's extremely pure. Like it's almost pure concept. And looking to the future, I'd be very fortunate if there isn't a natural constriction of the type of roles that I'm offered or I'm allowed to play based on my age and my type, et cetera, my resume. But writing is a place where there's no overhead, and you can continue to develop it artistically as long as you can think. So I've wanted to get into it partially to ensure that I have an avenue to develop creatively going forward for the rest of my life. And I've been very pleased to recognize all of the ways that it speaks to the things that I already do. And I would say if I were to sit in front of a group of younger actors, I would be like, my actual advice to you would be to start writing immediately. Like, get your reps in. At the very worst, what it'll do is it'll help you be a better actor.
Yes.
At the very worst, at the very least, right?
Yeah. And
at the most, you may find a path to sort of self-realization creatively that you didn't think was open to you. You can author your own material. You can help collaborate with other people, even in times where you're not being hired as an actor. You can keep your hand in. You can create or sell or develop the type of literature and the type of properties and the type of narratives that you would be perfect for. People like yourself would be perfect for. If you feel you're not working that much, it's probably not because you're terrible. It's probably because you're underrepresented and people don't quite know what to do with you, right? Well, you can help answer that by trying to put some of that stuff into the world that is saying, this is what you do with me, right? Will all of those things be successful? Of course not. But that's not the point.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And what you explained too about like actors should just sit around and an act, right? Like why would that be weird? I mean, there's back to my Kung Fu world. We have kids and they're right now, prepping with their performance class, and some of them want to be in the lion. Some of them only want to play the drums. Some of them only want to do the cymbals. And I'm like, yeah, well, you got to learn all the parts, because then you'll be able to do your part better, knowing what the lion does if you're just playing the music, and vice versa. And you can't, make them learn all aspects, whether they're going to perform them or not, because there's that empathy, but also you learn it better. So like you said, if anything, it just makes you better at your craft, the chosen one that you're going to use as your main source of expression. So that makes a lot of sense. I don't think I've ever heard it as usual per Hoon Lee's, way of articulating, put in such a manner of which they do go so hand in hand. And I think it's because it's so intimidating for maybe an actor to go, oh, I'm not a writer. Because I've been very guilty of saying I'm not a writer. Like Greg Rucka has actually yelled at me for saying those words. Stop saying that. You're a storyteller, though. You made a documentary, so you're a storyteller, and it just means you're putting that onto a page. It's the same.
Here's the most obvious example. Here's the most obvious example of this sort of phenomenon. I can't tell you how many times people have told me, well, I can't sing. Of course you can sing. What you're talking about is, I can't sing in a way that I could make a living from it.
Right.
Or I can't sing in a way that people will compliment me on my singing, given the current stylistic preferences and fashion of the day. That's what you're actually saying. Because if you look at the mass history of successful musicians out there, you have everybody from Celine Dion to Iggy Pop. So what's good singing? Of course you can sing. The question is, does singing bring value into your life? Does singing mean something to you? And my guess is most people, it really would if they allowed themselves. And they're missing out because of some other idea that makes zero sense and doesn't matter. If you have an impulse to, you're a human being. We have voices for a reason. And it's we have bodies for a reason. No one would say, well, you shouldn't exercise because you're not great at it.
Well, right? I mean, to be fair, this is coming from someone who sings well.
It's the same thought. I don't exercise particularly well.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. I'm teasing.
But it's why should you well, I can't dance. Of course you can dance.
Yes.
Of course you can dance.
Yes. No, 100%. Those are really great analogies. And I could probably talk to you all day, but I fear that you won't come back and talk to me again if I keep going for 2 hours and be like, keep going, Hoon Lee. share. I've got 10
No, we'll find a time and I'll get more information from you about how to become an
we'll do the
activist.
same. We'll do the 80-20 split. I'm comfortable with that. I'm comfortable with that.
That works.
Before I log off though, the last time there was a Writers Guild strike, the thing that I remember was Dr. Horrible. Did you ever see that? But
Dr. Horrible. Yeah.
So in my mind, I was like, oh, maybe they'll start doing those productions. Real quick, do you have any comments since it's so fresh? The
strike is really interesting in the sense that it's going to be a problem for everyone. I hope it is over quick.
Yeah.
But I will say, as my first year in the WGA, I was paying attention to it for once. And
welcome
a little bit. That's fine, but I do feel like the issues at hand are incredibly important.
Yeah.
And things like the streaming services and how writers make a living. I think the Guild is exactly on the right side of this. Okay. I can't evaluate. I can't do all the math on the percentages and stuff. I don't know what's considered greedy. That's what the Producers Guild, the Producers Union is going to bring back to the table, is sort of saying we're cutting costs, or blah, blah, blah. And then the Writers Guild will hold up these, triple digit million salaries that the CEOs are getting.
Right.
Everyone has a point. But from what I've seen in terms of what was offered by the Guild and how the producers responded, there's a lot of distance. And some of those things, one of them I believe I echoed in an Instagram story, which was about the Guild wanting to regulate and restrict the use of artificial intelligence. The fact that it was almost a completely flat rejection from the producers, I think it's a it's a big misstep in my mind, because that technology changes so quickly. The contracts are going to be renegotiated again in several years.
Yeah.
They could have taken the opportunity to say, we value your human voice. We value your lived experience. And this is a real easy way for us to show that, is to say, yes, of course, there should be some regulation on these tools, because we're an industry of people telling stories about people to people.
Yeah.
They could have said something along those lines, and I think the optics would have been much better. Instead, how it comes across to me is, if we could replace you, we would. If we could replace you with machines and software, we absolutely would, in order to increase our profits. And to me, that was a missed opportunity. And obviously, there's a lot of nuance to the conversation. Maybe there's large things I'm missing, but I can tell you how it will be perceived. And I think that's how it will be perceived.
Oh,
it did 100%. Lead me to have a really interesting conversation with ChatGPT, though.
Oh, I have done the same. What does it say about you, Hoon Lee?
Oh, no, I asked ChatGPT. I asked them, I started asking them questions about why should producers should or should not use artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
I think ChatGPT had a very balanced and actually fairly nuanced response to all that. Mm-hmm. So that was good.
Yeah, it's a little scary, to be honest, because, you're kind of like playing with this new toy tool, but I'm like, okay, the Cylons are coming. Like, that's it.
No. You know what it's like?
I'm like, oh my God.
No, you know what it's like, Mimi? Do you have a friend that reads a lot? Mm-hmm. Like reads
my husband.
Ton? Right. Yeah. And is like, and is pretty quick, right? Pretty sharp. Mm-hmm. So they can assimilate all this information, and then they can
pull it,
integrate it into their own current thoughts and credences, and then they can articulate them to you. That's what ChatGPT is doing, is just doing it super fast.
Yes, it's doing it super fast because it's pulling all the info. But it's fascinating though.
It is fascinating.
It's fascinating.
It's very fascinating.
It's the beginning. It's I know we're not at the Cylons yet, but it's to me, I'm going, whoo, here we go. Because I've had I know I gotta let you go. I've had interesting conversations with artists, right? About the AI and because they're one of my kids like messed around, did these really cool images of me. I'm like, oh yeah, make me look 30 years younger. Love that. And, like, oh my gosh. And like a warrior person and just, it's fascinating. But, the creatives, that side of things. And like you said, the human side of things, it's still, I feel like we're a long way from being replaceable, right? It's human.
But the mother problem, or the mother thing that we wrestle with at the end of the day, I think more and more, I'm just thinking this is it's just the constant and relentless pursuit of increased profit. Like, that's what's really killing us.
Agreed. Yeah,
because if you think about artistic AI, why is this important as a problem? It's because, well, at least some aspect of it is because what we put value on is a product that can be sold, or a type of product or production capacity of an artist that needs to be protected so that they can make a living from their art. Now, on the other hand, if what we valued in art was process, right? Mm-hmm. Then the result would matter less. The fact that a computer did it, we wouldn't value it as much as the fact that the human did it. Mm-hmm. We would see the value in the human hand and the human process. And we'd say, look at this painting. But what's more important is why I decided to acquire it is because every time I look at this painting, my understanding of the journey to that painting is meaningful to me.
Yeah.
Right. And we don't put emphasis on that. So we put emphasis on, can I get a result as quickly as possible so I can minimize my invested time and maximize my return on the sale of that product? It's like, so on some level, I'm not worried about it, because I think if we address the larger question, some of the other stuff will start to have the volume turned down a little bit. And I think we need to address the larger question. It's just feeding into so many of our problems.
Yeah, I like that you, although have all these really like in-depth thoughts on things, you do tend to remain hopeful. Because as you said, I talk to Greg Rock all the time, and he's like,
apocalyptic.
Yeah, it's like no. Greed is the reason for all things, and he's constantly proving it true every time we have a conversation on whatever it may be. And he also did novels where it was like, whatever it was, sex trafficking, all these really crazy things, and at the bottom line, it's like, oh, not because they're enslaving people, it's because there's a profit to be made, right? Like anything evil is usually driven by greed and money and all of that. And so it's scary when that's a motivator.
Here's the thing, though. Here's the thing. Like, I don't know about the causality of it. I mean, I'm not saying I disagree. I'm saying I don't know.
Right.
Of it, right. We've, people who have experienced racism firsthand.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem tied to a profit motive.
Right.
Right. And could you track it to a profit motive? Maybe. But there's enough obscurity there for me to question that. So is it that we developed systems of racism just to serve our greed, or is it that we tried to find a way to leverage our racism? Right.
Right.
More both, maybe both, depending on where you are, who you are, that sort of thing. But I look at it like, well, if greed exists on one end of the spectrum, on the other end of the spectrum is something like, I don't know, I'm going to get this wrong, but like sacrifice, maybe. Let's call it sacrifice, right? Okay. And I say there's plenty of examples of that floating around too. We just think of it as commonplace. And so unless someone donates $100 million to some charity, we don't take note of it. But any mother sacrifices for their child, and it's so pedestrian we don't think about it. We expect it. And that gives me hope, because that's part of our nature too. Right. And it's, don't have to look far to see it. And so I feel like maybe we're giving that short shrift, and maybe the real problem is that we don't know how to exercise it. And we do know how to exercise this other thing. We've built systems to help it become easier. We haven't created systems that reduce the friction on this other impulse that we have to help exercise that and to help build that capacity up. So it might be more of an imbalance than a plague, but it might be a plague. I don't know. Might be a plague.
I love it. Yeah. After all of that, you're like, but it also.
Well, but that's why I remain optimistic. I see plenty of good happening. It tends to be more low key, I think. No,
I appreciate that, and I am going to be very mindful of your time here. So I am definitely, though, writing off like where we left off, because I think we have a lot more down the rabbit hole to go. I'm going to have to get you in on a regular schedule, I think, as another co-host of the show. I'm like, this show no longer belongs to me. It's just like, let's just keep this cycle going. And I'm in all seriousness, though, I've always gotten amazing commentary on how much people enjoy listening to you speak, conversation, and just like your thoughts on things, and not just on acting and everything. But yeah, I really appreciate these conversations. I always learn so much. And thank you also for your interest today and just being so supportive.
It's awesome. It is really awesome. I hope you take a well-deserved break and
thank you.
Treat yourself in some way. But
I will try.
You're literally impacting generations. Not many people can say that.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that, especially coming from you. So until next time, Hoon Lee.
All right. Take care. Bye.
That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to The Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Please subscribe and rate my podcast on your platform of choice and leave a review. You can become a patron of the show at patreon.com/SifuMimiChan to help keep this podcast going. Follow me and interact on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook.